l'Italia faceva parte dell'ASE. Avere il passaporto è anche un simbolo di status tra i discendenti, ma anche incoraggia la ricerca delle origini e lo sviluppo del turismo delle radici. Ho messo questa parte del libro di Vito Tetti, Quel che resta, e lui dice che tutto questo è il segno che i luoghi non muoiono, nemmeno quando le persone se ne sono andate. I luoghi continuano a vivere fino a quando ci sono persone a esse legate, da essi provenienti fino a quando qualcuno, magari discendenti dalle persone nate nei luoghi, ne avrà ricordo. Questo turismo delle radici penso che anche si può sviluppare, può avvivare questi piccoli borghi che noi discendenti abbiamo ancora queste memorie dell'Italia che i nostri avi hanno lasciato. E per la risposta di questa domanda, cosa significa essere italiano? Che l'italianità nei discendenti è stata costruita nel luogo della memoria e del cambiamento sociale. Ognuno ha il suo modo di sentirsi italiano, sia con il cibo, con la musica, presentando un lavoro qui, e secondo i segni diacritici che condividono e le loro esperienze individuali. E adesso siamo noi discendenti che con altri simboli immaginiamo un'Italia che forse non esiste più, ma possiamo ricordarla e riviverla a partire dalla nostra memoria. E questo, grazie mille.
Siamo 30 secondi in anticipo, quindi we have 3 minutes for discussion if you have questions. Se avete domande abbiamo 3 minuti per la discussione, se no guadagniamo tempo per la prossima presentazione. If you have no questions, we gain some time for the next presentation. Okay? So no. Well, I thank you. La ringrazio per questa presentazione molto bella. Cioè è il terzo posto per l'emigrazione italiana. Ovviamente gli altri 2 saranno le città più importanti.
Sì, San Paolo e penso che Spirito Santo.
Sì.
Va bene, allora io direi che possiamo passare alla seconda presentazione. La seconda presentazione è di Enrique Tringaden. Questo è un ricercatore che vive in Brasile, è uno storico e coordina i programmi di addestramento nel Museo dell'Immigrazione di San Paolo di Brasile e dove lavora dal 2014. Il titolo, la presentazione sarà in lingua inglese. Il titolo è The New Long-Term Exhibition at the Immigration Museum of São Paulo, Brazil. The result is of 10 years of debates, listening and challenges. Cioè la mostra a lungo termine presso il Museo dell'Emigrazione di San Paolo di Brasile è il risultato di 10 anni di dibattiti, di ascolto e di sfide.
Grazie mille, grazie a tutti. Vuoi parlare in inglese? First and foremost, I would like to express my gratitude for the opportunity to be here once again in Genova, participating in another edition of this important symposium. I had the privilege of attending in 2019, I think, here, and it's an honor to represent the Immigration Museum of the state of São Paulo once more. I am one of the coordinators of the Museum of Immigration in São Paulo, and also the Museum of Coffee in Santos, closer to São Paulo. And today I'm here to share with you our latest project one that holds special significance, especially this year as we celebrated 150 years of the Italian immigration in Brazil. The milestone invites us to reflect on the shared history between Italy and Brazil and to connect with research being conducted in Italy and around the world on immigration and the Italian diaspora. My talk today will focus on the renewal and revitalization process of the Immigrations Museum's new long-term exhibition. I am to demonstrate how this work contributes to the theme of this roundtable, rethinking and redefining their narratives, perceptions, and interpretations of the Italian diaspora in Brazil. To begin, and it's important to contextualize the history of the building, where the Museum of Immigration is located. This historical building was built between 1886 and 1888 with a very specific purpose: to receive immigrants, especially Europeans initially, arriving in Brazil to work in coffee plantations in the countryside of the state of São Paulo. Financed by the state government of São Paulo, heavily influenced by the interests of coffee farmers, it became known as the Hospedaria de Imigrantes do Brás, or hostery in shelter of immigrants of the Brás, or São Paulo. Brás is the neighborhood where this building is located. So the building began operations in 1887, welcoming its first guests, hundreds of Italians. From its inception until it ceased operations in 1978, the building recorded the arrival of around 800,000 Italians, the largest group among more than 70 different nationalities registered, excluding internal Brazilian migrants. But what was the building, the Hospedaria? It was more than a mere arrival point. It was a structured space designed to welcome immigrants during their first days in Brazil. It featured a hospital, nursery, police station, currency exchange, and interpreters, including Italian speakers. This site was not only a reception center, but is also, in São Paulo, a symbolic marker of the profound economic and social changes that transformed São Paulo into a cosmopolitan metropolis within a century. After its closure in 1978, the Hospedaria, the Ostello, was designated as a historical heritage site in the 80s, and in 1993 transformed into the Immigration Museum. Since then, the museum has undergone various phases, including its reopening in 2014 with the new long-term exhibition, Migrate: Experiences, Memories, and Identities. From that point forward, we began questioning who was this exhibition made for? Who did it represent? Despite its modernity and interactivity, significant gaps became evident. Many people still associated the museum exclusively with Italian immigration, overlooking its mission to represent the diversity of stories and communities that have shaped Brazil. Immigration is a dynamic, ever-evolving topic. New research, artistic projects, and oral history programs have raised questions that led us to conclude it was time to close the chapter of the 2014 and embark on a new project. Thus, in 2022, we initiated a comprehensive curatorial process involving not only the museum's team, but also immigrant communities. We organized listening sessions where groups evaluated the previous exhibition, offering critiques, praises, and suggestions. Here we can see these groups: international migrant organizations, academic community and activists, communities associated with the Immigrant Festival, and museum neighbors. international organizations, migration authorities and NGOs, and museums and institutions working with memory. These dialogues result in 10 key conclusions that laid the foundation for the new project. Here we can see these conclusions. The current exhibition has not overcome the challenges set in 2014. There is a need to dispel the mistaken understanding that historical migration is limited to the Great Migration, the Grande Imigrazione in Brazil. We say end of the 19th century until the beginning of the 30s, for example. Lack of focus on the history of the building, importance of continuing to explore the emotional dimension surrounding individual memories. The institution's collection should be utilized in ways that go beyond scenographic use. Museum objects should be used more equitably. The current exhibition lacks interpretative frameworks based on national history, the significance of Brazil's new migration law. Greater balance is needed in the curatorial narrative, and contemporary migrations are underrepresented in the current exhibition. So, to engage the public in this process, we created a temporary installation that the primary questions driving the renewal. The goal was to propose a more inclusive, representative exhibition connected to the new perspective in migration studies. Thank you. So his installation, Migrate, Concerns, Questions, and Possibilities. And here, the 5 questions. What makes someone feel at home? Why do people migrate? Doesn't the border free or limit? Is this the museum and our collection the heritage of migration? And is there a Brazilian everywhere? There is a joke in Brazil that we can find a Brazilian everywhere. So, how does all this help us rethink? Firstly, by revisiting historical documents and underrepresented narratives Italian migration to Brazil. By revisiting historical documents and underrepresented narratives in Brazil. To compare, this is our old current exhibition that we closed last Sunday, Migrate, Experiences, Memories, and Identities, and our new long-term exhibition that we hope to launch it next year in May, Shared History About Us, with these new sections: Borders and Territories, Journeys, Indigenous and Black Displacements, Immigration in Brazil, Immigrants Hostel of São Paulo, People Who Migrate, Internal Migrations, Brazilian Diaspora, Immigration Heritage, Migration Observatory, and Surnames. So, as I say, how can rethinking a new exhibition help redefine the Italian diaspora in Brazil? Firstly, by revisiting historical documents and underrepresented narratives. Italian immigration to Brazil is often romanticized in facing a journey of hardship and triumph. However, our archives reveal far more complex and diverse stories. For instance, we discovered records of Guglielmo Borsato, a Venetian immigrant who exchanged letters with Pope Pius X. So behind every record lies a rich narrative that deserves to be wrote. Additionally, new approaches were incorporated. How is migration perceived through the lenses of gender, childhood, and old age? What stories do these groups have to share? We aim to explore these dimensions, broadening perspectives on both Italian and other forms of migration. Finally, we deepened our study of the museum's collection, which includes nearly 13,000 objects. A striking example is a toolbox donated by Egidio Torresani, brought by his grandfather in 1889. This led us to ask, what is the heritage of migration? This question guided a project involving communities, donors, inviting them to reflect on what they consider cultural heritage tied to their migratory histories. Well, and now, finally, a crucial point. None of this makes sense without a wide, engaged, audience visiting us. We are not looking for passive visitors, but rather curious, questioning individuals who come to the museum with inquiries and leave with even more profound reflections. We want every visitor to feel part of the museum, represented, included, and acknowledged in our narratives. Immigration museums around the world have a unique and unavailable opportunity to tell the history of all of us. A story that is constantly transforming, always in motion, reflecting the richness of human experience, Beyond preserving memories, these museums have the responsibility to convey a powerful message. Every history matters because every journey contributes to the understanding of our collective identity. Thank you.
Grazie. In your list of themes that the new museum will be exploring, you include indigenous and black displacements. Is that a reference to slaves?
Yeah, we are working together with the Afro Museum in Brazil and working together the Indigenous Cultural Museum. It is a recently museum opened last year in Brazil. So we are talking with artists and also with another museums to talk about slavery, to talk about, of course, indigenous displacements in the past, but also in the present, and also talking with the new migrations that are arriving in Brazil, like people from Haiti, people from many countries of Africa. So we are exploring together with another museums, another specialists, how can we work with indigenous and African and black displacements.
And are slaves considered to be immigrants?
No, they're not considered immigrants. Because of this, we are talking about displacements, not migration of Africans in the 19th, 18th, 17th century in Brazil. So we are talking more or less displacements than migration in terms of the African and the indigenous migrations. Displacements.
Okay.
Just to follow up on that question, thank you very much for your presentation. Will this collaboration with some of the other museums, especially the Afro-Brazilian Museum, will you be looking at the issue of European recruitment, or Brazilian recruitment of European labor as a way to whiten the Brazilian community and that whole question? And then my second question is, when is Diaspora Italiana coming to São Paulo?
When the Diaspora Italiana...
When is Diaspora Italiana coming to São Paulo? But I'm more interested in the first question.
Okay. And so for us, it's a crucial question, talk about the whitening policy in Brazil. Our public is a very conservative public that visit the Museum of Migration. More than 80% of our visitors are descendant of Italians, Spanish immigrants, Portuguese immigrants, and we are trying to dialogue with these visitors that in many cases denying the history of this whitening policy. So for us, it's very important to work with the indigenous displacements, black displacements, but also internal migration to talk how in some sense the European immigration are related to this immigration policy, the whitening policy in Brazil. And for us also, it's important, our last section in the new exhibition is surnames. We have a wall with 12,000 surnames of people that were welcome in our building. But now we have, after this wall with surnames, an installation that say what represents your surname. It represents what was given to you or what was taken for you. So for us, it's a crucial question. And about the diaspora italiana, they started in Brazil. Well, we are now celebrating 115 years of the Italian immigration. The first group that arrived in Brazil arrived in the state of Espírito Santo. But we believe that the 2 decades of in the 19th century are very important in these terms, in numbers. Just for example, São Paulo, in the first census of the history of Brazil, 1872, São Paulo had 30,000 people, inhabitants living in the city. Just in 1891, 90,000 Italians arrived in our building, just in our building. So the last decades, especially after the abolition of slavery in 1888, is when we started to talk about the history of the Italian diaspora in Brazil.
Ok. More questions? Altre domande? Allora, c'è una domanda dal...
I'm also Brazilian, and I was talking to Henrique yesterday, so I would just like to express that I think it's brilliant, the idea of this installation close to the wall, because some years ago I visited the museum and I didn't see that installation because it didn't exist, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's very symbolical because I don't know if everybody's aware, but the descendants of Africans in Brazil have all Portuguese surnames because it's difficult can I say in Italian?
Yeah.
Perché quando hanno portato delle persone schiavizzate dall'Africa in Brasile, loro hanno cancellato la loro storia e un modo di farlo era togliendo il loro cognome e attribuendo il cognome del proprietario di questi schiavi a loro, e questi proprietari, tra virgolette, erano tutti portoghesi. E quindi noi parlavamo di questa cosa ieri perché deve essere molto doloroso che non conoscere le sue radici, perché io per esempio che ho una discendenza spagnola, ho il cognome spagnolo, so di dove vengo. Tutta la popolazione brasiliana nera, che è metà del popolo, non sa da dove viene. Sa che viene dall'Africa, ma non sa da dove, perché questa parte della storia è stata cancellata. E quindi è molto simbolico, perché parlavamo di questa cosa ieri, appunto perché un visitatore che arriva al museo e forse ha la discendenza italiana e vede il cognome italiano, si sente orgoglioso, ma forse una persona che è indigeno o che è...
Ok, do you have comments? Did you understand?
Yeah. I understand. No, just say in the current sentence, the last sentence of our new exhibition is a question. As I say, does their surname you have mean what was given to you or what was taken from you?
Sì, è la cosa molto razzista del Brasile è che tanti vedono questa diversità etnica come una cosa molto romantica, però invece è stata una storia violenta.
Bene.
Perché quelli che hanno discendenze europee hanno spesso orgoglio del suo cognome, mentre quelli che hanno un cognome diverso, portoghese, senza avere la discendenza portoghese, sono persone che si sentono male.
Ok, grazie. No, è molto interessante questa cosa. Tra l'altro, un ultimo commento, poi passiamo alla prossima, che 800.000 immigrati italiani è più della popolazione della città di Genova. solo per dire qual è la dimensione dell'immigrazione italiana in Brasile. The immigration in Brazil is 800,000, which is more than the population of the city of Genoa.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so we could have transferred the city of Genoa directly to Brazil. Ok, va bene, la prossima comunicazione allora è Alessandra Vannucci, the mission Adventures Autofiction of Italian Stage Directors in Filmmakers in Brazil, cioè la traduzione italiana e poi è la missione, avventure d'autonarrazione di registi italiani in Brasile 1947-70. Alessandra Vannucci ha collaborato con il C6 più o meno dalla sua fondazione e noi abbiamo pubblicato un libro di Alessandra Vannucci che si intitola Baritono ai tropici e quindi abbiamo e poi ha pubblicato altri libri, è da poco rientrata in Italia e insegna letteratura e cultura brasiliana all'Università di Torino. Alessandra.
Grazie. I apologize for speaking Italian. I was not prepared to have so many English speaking. I hope you understand. Anyway, I will be prepared to any questions you would pose after the very short time I have. And I would like to have the command of photographs, because in any case, if it does make no sense what I say, you will see a lot of good pictures. I think come si fa? Giù? O su? Ok. Ringrazio il CISEI, il MEI, è un onore avere Fabio Capocaccia qui a dirigere i nostri lavori. Mi sembra che questa tavola sia estremamente interessante. Io vado veramente ad essere molto breve, anche perché su questo tema ho scritto un libro di questi che non sono stati citati in portoghese. Ho scritto un saggio lungo di 50 pagine su una rivista americana che si chiama Journal of Italian Cinema Studies e è in uscita un dossier tremendamente polemico su Teatro e Storia, che è un'importante rivista di storia del teatro italiana. E il dossier si intitola Streller e gli altri. Insomma, qui chi conosce un po' della cultura teatrale italiana capirà che forse non tutti voi sapete che nei dipartimenti di studi teatrali si rimpiange poco, a dire la verità, il vuoto storiografico provocato dalla partenza nell'immediato dopoguerra di parte rappresentativa della generazione che ha inaugurato la scena di regia, ovvero la scena moderna in Italia, e che per questo fu detta dal mio maestro Claudio Meldolesi la generazione dei registi. Ebbene, del secolo e mezzo di espatri teatrali italiani in Brasile, perché non è soltanto dentro all'immigrazione, 150 anni dalla migrazione, abbiamo tantissimi viaggi di artisti italiani in Brasile, strapieno di tutti esauriti, di contatti illustri, dalla Ristori, che fu amica personale dell'imperatore, a Salvini, proclamato dai brasiliani il più grande attore vivente, a Ernesto Rossi, che si presentò come attore dei due mondi e aveva anche una lettera di Garibaldi in tasca, alla Duse, che naturalmente fece innamorare Mezzario e divorziò tenendosi la compagnia con tutti i debiti, ai viaggi di Caruso, di Bergaglia, di Pirandello, eccetera. Questo, il caso dei registi negli anni 50, è secondo me l'episodio più clamoroso di una lunga vicenda di scambi di idee avvenuti non solo sulle tavole del palcoscenico, ma anche nell'esperienza di vita nei bar all'angolo, ove gli incontri si facevano mani, corpi, appuntamenti mancati, amori, tradimenti, ventilatori rumorosi, sigarette lasciate a metà, progetti interrotti. Quei giovani, maturati all'ombra dell'Accademia d'Arte Drammatica, si chiamavano Adolfo Celi, Luciano Salce, che erano prima leva di registi diplomati con Squarzina, Gassman, Pandolfi, Guerrieri, più Ruggero Jacobbi, un outsider straordinario, poi Flaminio Boldini, Gianni Ratto, Alberto D'Aversa, tutti uomini, vi faccio notare, che negli anni 40, usciti a 20 anni dalla seconda guerra, rimasticavano le sfide, diciamo, che possiamo far assurgere ai grandi maestri Silvio D'Amico, Anton Giulio Bragaglia, però loro sperimentavano un po' tutto il possibile, mentre sbarcavano il lunario facendo gli assistenti nelle compagnie di giro. A partire dal 47, stanchi forse di attendere e cogliendo le occasioni del tempo, emigrarono dall'Italia in macerie verso un Brasile, terra mitica, terra aperta agli esploratori, ai fondatori, agli avventurieri, ai coloni, eccetera. E possiamo parlare quindi di una piccola diaspora. Io finora ho usato il termine migrazione, ma oggi uso diaspora, considerando che con loro si misero in viaggio anche musicisti, scenografi, sceneggiatori, costumisti, fidanzate in gran numero, e ad un certo punto minacciò di raggiungerli pure Vittorio Gassman, che certamente avrebbe spostato le sorti se l'avesse fatto non solo del teatro in Brasile, ma direi soprattutto del campionato di avventure. Galanti erano belli, erano capaci, in breve divennero protagonisti di quella frenetica arena della modernità che fu la città di San Paolo negli anni 50. San Paolo non restituiva l'immagine dell'esotica dolce vita di Rio de Janeiro, ma di una metropoli in pieno sviluppo verticale, una città continua a Milano, nel totalmente nuovo d'America. Lì l'arte, considerata fin dagli anni 30 una specie di distrazione per ricchi, malignava Lévi-Strauss nel 55, ora invece si annunciava sui muri come prodotto di consumo nell'incipiente mercato di massa, una enorme città. La vocazione della città a diventare epicentro dell'industria culturale latinoamericana, come è fino ad oggi, se non si considera Città del Messico, è evidente. Tra il 47 e il 54 si fondarono musei, industrie cinematografiche, canali televisivi, case editrici, teatri. I teatri si moltiplicano esponenzialmente da 2 a 88. Iniziative che fanno capo a pochi nomi, per lo più di migranti italiani, come questo signore, il signor Franco Zampari, che con il suo compare Cicillo Matarazzo, entrambi napoletani, erano soci, tra altri amigos della società anonima che nel 48 partorisce il Teatro Brasileiro di Commedia e la cinematografica Veracruz. Ecco, sono avanti, ok. Tutto ciò in una città senza tradizioni teatrali, mentre la capitale, Rio de Janeiro, la corte, con i suoi 114 teatri, restava a fare un po' da latifondo dei comici all'antica e del teatro di rivista, importantissimo. Perciò, allo stesso modo in cui importava macchine e ingegneri per le sue fabbriche, Franco Zampari si era messo a importare registi. Prima Celi, che lavoricchiava a Buenos Aires, dove era arrivato con un film di Aldo Fabrizi, e arrivò a San Paolo con le tasche vuote, la testa piena di idee e un biglietto di rientro in Italia, casomai la cosa non andasse per il verso giusto. Dopo pochi mesi fece scritturare Jacobi, vediamo se l'ho beccato, scusate, sono andata indietro, Giorgio Jacobi, che invece si arrangiava a Rio de Janeiro come critico di cinema e regista abbastanza cult, con un repertorio tutto speciale che seguiva passo passo le tracce del piccolo teatro di cui era stato fondatore. Nel 50 arrivò Luciano Salce, reduce dal successo parigino delle scenette con Bonucci e Caprioli. Nel 51 fu la volta di Flembollini, vediamo se lo azzecchiamo anche lui, la cui elezione a condizione di partente per il Brasile suscitò non poche invidie tra gli amici romani. Misurate le reciproche ambizioni, i rimasti cominciarono a citare quelli che erano partiti prima di brasiliani e poi di brasiliani, come se avessero fatto della destinazione un destino, e poi di quinta colonna della generazione, nel senso di un avamposto della regia in terre selvagge e conquistabili. Virgolette, vogliamo o no stendere tra Roma e San Paolo, scrisse Gassman a Celi in una lettera del 49, una mappa di idee e di scambi per distribuire tra noi come quadrumviri i compiti per rinfondare il nostro impero? Quindi vedete che quinta colonna è un termine che non si può tanto usare, vado alle conclusioni adesso, non si può tanto usare, e io ho chiamato il libro di missione italiana, perché comunque esiste una forte ideologia in tutto ciò, no? Il potere della, virgolette, turma dos italiano, si diceva in portoghese, era tale da limitare concorrenze e dissidenze anche tra loro. Quindi dovete immaginare una scena in cui questo gigantesco movimento del teatro degli italiani mise in concorrenza gli stessi italiani, che a un certo punto fondarono nuovi teatri con nuove cinematografiche e nuove imprese all'angolo della strada, facendo concorrenza al teatro di Zampari. Il fatto è che questo movimento in pochi anni proiettò intorno a sé un euforico clima cosmopolita, e fu un fenomeno che neppure lo stesso impresario Zampari era stato in grado di prevedere. Messo in moto da questi giovani e dinamici registi, la macchina moderna funzionava per proprio conto, facendo per una decina d'anni lievitare ricchissimi presupposti locali. Era l'America. Anzi, spiega Celi, era il sogno d'America, che in Brasile si traduce con una frase: plantando dà. Come se basta che fa un po' e arriva. Perché questo? Perché una civiltà teatrale senza padri né padroni pareva loro un palco vuoto, da riempire di parole, voci, volti, corpi. E quindi poteva essere anche, come suggerisce Jacobi, il presentimento di essere anche ad altre latitudini non solo continuatori di un sapere, di una tradizione, ma anche i creatori di nuovi linguaggi. Fu questo, credo, che fece percepire quell'emigrazione non come un destino per niente penoso, anzi affatto straordinario. Significò lanciarsi alle spalle quel sistema stabilizzato per rifondare qualcosa di qualitativamente primordiale, una missione, col vantaggio però tropicale dell'irriverenza, del poter lavorare sul presupposto della tabula rasa. Cosa significa questo? Che loro si misero in testa che il teatro brasiliano non esisteva o che quello che esisteva era veramente poco importante e questo per avvantaggiare invece questa vocazione seminale della missione che era una missione da veri bandeirantes, se vogliamo, cioè proprio da colonizzatori di un palco che era rappresentato senza repertorio, senza professionalità, un nuovo mondo in attesa di essere, come dire, invaso dall'oggetto della missione. Qual era questo oggetto? La scena di regia. Il regista, non a caso, io all'inizio ho detto, erano tutti uomini, perché comunque si trattava di comandare, diciamo, la scena dove le donne avevano una funzione sì molto prioritaria, le attrici, ma davanti sul palcoscenico, avendo dietro di loro il potere del maschio come regista o come produttore. Adesso io vi faccio vedere qualche immagine, non ho assolutamente tempo di dettagliare tutti questi spettacoli e vado al mio finale, che riguarda l'inevitabile revisionismo. Vi ho detto che loro fecero televisione, cinema, teatro, ad un certo punto divenne veramente una lobby, la lobby degli italiani. Con bellissime rappresentazioni. C'è da chiedersi se tutto ciò era avanguardia o se in qualche modo loro fossero anche portati a interpretare come moderno tutto ciò che andava di moda nelle grandi capitali europee. Vedete gli autori che mettono in scena grandissimi successi sia nelle sale che nei teatri, ed eccoci. Allora, l'inevitabile, vado al finale, ci fu un revisionismo che investì questo clan e una bufera anche mediatica scatenata dal fallimento della cinematografica Veracruz nel 1956, che provocò il rientro in Italia per alcuni, fomentando una polemica di toni nazionalisti che invocò addirittura l'emancipazione da quello che fu chiamato culturalismo cosmopolita proposto dagli italiani e che ora molti giudicavano inefficienti all'analisi del sottosviluppo del paese. C'è da dire che ci sono eccezioni molto importanti a questo giudizio finale, che però il grande movimento si interruppe in qualche modo e a voler tirare un po' le somme e quindi ecco, le eccezioni riguardano soprattutto, per chi poi si interessa ad approfondire, Ruggero Jacobi e Gianni Ratto. Però una cosa interessante è questo film che invece Adolfo Celi, che fu un po' il grande tubarão, era chiamato così perché guadagnava più di tutti, fece quando tornò in Italia. Ricordatevi che quindi Celi in Brasile stette 15 anni a fare il regista e quando tornò in Italia fece l'attore, come noi tutti sappiamo. E però fece un ultimo film insieme a Gassman e Lucignani, e non è un caso che questo film si chiama Alibi ed è una sequenza di storie dove Celi comincia la sua storia, come vedete, a Rio de Janeiro, quindi elimina completamente la San Paolo dei grattacieli, del lavoro folle, disperatissimo, ambienta tutta la sua storia brasiliana in un altro ambiente esotico, divertente, che possa in qualche modo far da alibi ad una specie di fallimento, no, di questa missione. Noi accumuliamo alibi quando sentiamo che qualcosa non è andato tanto bene. Si trattava di fare i conti con i propri progetti giovanili, con la missione di instaurare la regia negli avamposti oltreoceanici e quindi anche le scuse per non aver compiuto quello che effettivamente si era promesso. Quindi lui mostra spiagge, esotismo, belle donne. Quando comincia il film, voi dovete pensare subito dopo questa immagine, ecco, non lo mostro più, c'è una frase che dice «O Brasil è». Sembra una pubblicità del Brasile. Quello che successe a questo film, che fra l'altro è un bellissimo film ed è su YouTube, se lo volete vedere, fu che andò a Venezia nell'anno 69, l'anno di Porcile, del mito di Glauber Rocha, e nessuno si accorse del film che fu considerato coloniale, paternalista e assolutamente insignificante di fronte alla grande potenza dei giovani brasiliani, che invece erano tutti legati alla rivoluzione. Quindi io concludo dicendo che in questa grande avventura avventura, sicuramente importante, come ho fatto notare all'inizio, c'è anche un po' l'effetto boomerang di ogni ideologia cosmopolita che alla fine, come dire, ritorna nella memoria anche, diciamo, e nel patrimonio collettivo, anche nel patrimonio collettivo di una modernità teatrale, ritorna anche come un'esperienza poi conclusa nel decennio degli anni 50-60, cioè nella piena modernizzazione, ma che non procede oltre. Grazie.
Grazie. Molto interessante questa avventura dei registi italiani in Brasile, insomma una cosa veramente poco nota, devo dire. Va bene, allora aprirei la discussione se ci sono domande su questo tema. Osservo solo una battuta che c'era nell'ultima slide, c'era scritto regia cieli, che ha una assonanza con un carcere romano, ma non ha niente a che fare.
Dove entrambi loro sono stati, cioè, Jacobi ci ha passato 3 mesi.
Ok, va bene, allora io direi che ringrazio e ripeto che è molto interessante questo tema, faremo un prossimo libro qua su questo argomento. È interessante perché cioè, l'emigrazione c'è una serie di capitoli dell'emigrazione. È una cosa incredibile, cioè ci sono gli architetti che sono emigrati, cioè gli architetti in qualche modo hanno plasmato l'architettura del Sud America. Quindi ci sono queste avventure ad alto contenuto. Tutti pensano che l'emigrazione sia l'emigrazione con la valigia di carta, eccetera, però c'è un'emigrazione di grande valore, questo è un esempio. Va bene, allora passiamo all'ultima memoria, che è affidata a Martino Marazzi. Martino Marazzi è dell'Università degli Studi di Milano, cioè l'Università Statale degli Studi, professore di letteratura italiana, è stato visiting professor alla New York University, ha scritto vari libri e ha collaborato con Gianfranco Rosi, il regista? Sì. No? Sì, ok. Quindi, allora, credo che farà la presentazione in inglese, in omaggio...
In hindi, la faccio in hindi.
Ecco, in omaggio alla internazionalità della nostra struttura, sì, ma lui è italiano.
Sono italiano.
Ecco, sì, ok, d'accordo.
Allora, dunque, vediamo col tempo che ci rimane. Io farò vedere in verità quattro copertine di libri. Cosa sta succedendo? Poi passo all'inglese. Cosa succede invece negli ultimissimi anni, mesi? A me è sembrato di vedere un qualcosa che sta accadendo nella cultura italiana in generale, se non altro nelle librerie tra i lettori. Cioè c'è una emergenza, una presenza di come cavolo si fa questo? Sotto, vediamo. Lì devo fare. Com'è che? Boh. Freccia bassa, sì, lo sto facendo. Devo far vedere le copertine dei libri. Forse... perfetto, grazie. Allora, io parlerò brevemente di 4 libri usciti negli ultimi 3-4 anni, che hanno tutti al centro l'incontro fra italiani, soprattutto italo-brasiliani o italo-sudamericani, e popolazioni indigene, indios, in vario modo. A me pare che questo sia una tendenza nuova, italiana, ma al tempo stesso globale. Teniamo però presente che il primo vero romanzo della letteratura italiana, se per italiano intendiamo pubblicato dopo l'unificazione d'Italia, è un romanzo che si chiama Confessioni di un italiano, di Ippolito Nievo, che esce nel 66, e la conclusione di Ippolito Nievo è una digressione dell'italiano del titolo, in cui parla della storia di suo figlio, del figlio del protagonista narrante, che è andato in Brasile e ha sterminato svariate decine o centinaia di indios, e così è il primo romanzo accreditato. Io invece oggi parlerò brevemente, limitandomi a un summary praticamente dell'idioma di Casilda Moreira e di Adrian Bravi, di Verde El Dorado dello stesso autore, di Piero Falamerica e Malaguti, che abbiamo presentato qui con la professoressa Vannucci alcuni mesi fa, e poi di Selvaggia Aspreforte, molto dantesco il titolo, di una grande autrice, una grandissima romanziera, Laura Pariani. So, what is this? What is this? What do we think of this? I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the stories, which are all very different, but summarizing the end, so to speak, is this part of a consolidating global decolonial attitude, or a smart, fashionable Italian-style way of ethno-washing? Well, we'll see. We'll have to see. But certainly this kind of, I would call it literary neo-indigeneity. One of his characteristics is it is obviously addressed to an Italian audience, and thus questioning the role of its Italian characters and narrators. And so potentially this could have repercussions in the way that we reconsider the role of Italian settlers, and more in general, in the way we frame and reread functions and strategic roles of parts of the Italian diaspora. Moreover, the novelty of such a cultural reframing invites the scholar to look backward in search of other indigenous traces in Italian, in Italo-diasporic letters and arts, which is something that is more easily done in South America rather than in North America, but we'll leave that. And so I'm going to discuss these novels in chronological order, in their fictionalized chronological order, starting with Verde El Dorado, which is sort of a rewriting of the great movie Mission. So Verde El Dorado is set in the first half of the 16th century. A young man, Ugolino, another Dantesque name, Ugolino from a Venetian merchant family, is horribly maimed during a fire, and with the approval of his family, he joins Sebastião Caboto, John Cabot's son, this is a true story, and sails with his crew to South America. The first-person narrative grows more and more intense as Ugolino, the young disfigured boy, trained in his youth in philosophy, relates his fate as a captive of a tribe of natives in a free and personal flow of wonder, horror, despondency, and tenderness. In fact, once on the coast of South America, Cabotos had turned inland, sailing upward from the Rio de la Plata, all the way into the forest. Ugolino's disfigurement made him a mysterious figure in the eyes of the natives, and his halo of respect saved him from the pain inflicted to his comrades, killed and ritualistically eaten. And yet, despite cannibalism, life takes its toll, and Ugolino progressively goes native, acquires confidence, finds love, learns the language, opens to the natives' worldview and their ecological cosmogony. When one of his Venetian brothers reaches him in an unexpected rescue mission, Ugolino, who had been discriminated against in Venice as a mostro, finally turns the offer down in a bewildering act of self-affirmation. Non avrei più potuto vivere lontano da queste terre. And so this historical novel ends negating the Western faith of progress and destruction without erasing the conflict and violence, cannibalism found in the forest. Likewise, Piero Falamerica still starts in the Venetian region, but 350 years later, that is after unification, at the height of the appalling miseria, which drove tens of thousands of rural laborers to the southern regions of Brazil. At first sight, Piero's story, Piero Falamerica, seems to belong to the classic epic of the Italian Great Migration. It is told in a third-person narrative, but in a highly subjective manner, expressed through frequent dialogues in strict Venetian dialect. The narrator is an hyper-conscious storyteller, a sort of bifunctional narrator cum meta-narrator, responsible for the numerous epigraphs opening every chapter, which which are in all cases culled from the scholarly sources listed in a bibliography. And here we find the reference to two of our great masters and mentors, the most respected Italian historians in the field of migration studies, Emilio Franzina and Piero Brunello, who have written pages and pages on the deeds and misdeeds of Italian immigrants in Brazil. The result is a novelistic report written in two different linguistic styles to be attributed to two different time frames, then and now, an illiterate dialect-speaking past and a critically informed present, and quite audibly to two distinct speaking minds. And here again, like in Verde El Dorado, the South American ecosphere is a cause of wonder and terror. Its indigenous dwellers, by now shrunk inside, pushed back with a very clear knowledge of the threat posed by the Western white invasion and land grabbing, are referred to in no uncertain terms as subhuman and bloodthirsty savages, with common derogatory terms, bugreiros, botocudos, while Brazilian society has forcibly grown into a mongrelized métissage testified by the presence of the caboclos. All of this transformed the classic immigrant story into a heretofore unheard chronicle of bloody massacres, a tale told by an idiot. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. Piero goes from rags to riches and kills and kills and kills. And his hands and his America are soiled with indigenous blood. Blood of men, of young women, of kids, some of them piously adopted and baptized with the blessing of the local clergy, Venetian clergy. The ears of the kids have been cut off as a proof for Piero's payments. Bloody genocidal massacres of the indigenous people of South America are also at the center of the narrative of Laura Pariani's Selvaggia Aspre Forte, which of course is a sentence from Dante, centers on the fascinating historical figure of painter and historiographer. This is Sebastian Caboto, Piero Brunello, of this man. Selvaggia Aspre Forte is the story of this man, so to speak, painter and ethnographer Guido Boggiani. The fate of Italians and other Europeans in El Coro Sud is central to Pariani's poetics, but I'll skip that. Here, the attention to Boggiani's documented interest for indigenous life and territory, he was a great photographer, he's one of his great photos, emerges through his relations with colleague artists, such as William Henry Hudson of Green Mansions, Georges Herel, and a number of other Italian, especially northern Italian, immigrant settlers and native figures. Their stories are interspersed with short fables of the indigenous tradition. The result of this novel is a multicultural polyphony at the service of one, Guido Boggiani, but at the same time, the eponymous forest and nature, Selvaggia Aspre Forte, that motivated his mysterious murder. Like Ugolino, Guido is on the verge of going native, strives to learn the language, strikes tender friendships with the local youth, and while speaking, painting, taking photos, shares their lives, widens his humanistic horizons, lets them in, becomes a thorn in the colonists' side. And I'll have to run, but art and ethnographic attitudes do not guarantee any kind of salvation. At the center of Pariani's novel, Boggiani visits Chicago's 1893 Columbian Exposition and stands in wonder next to his friend William Henry Hudson in front of this great painting, which is La Vuelta del Malón by Ángel de la Valle, a popular painting depicting the abduction, as you see, by roaming South American natives of an immaculate white young woman. Her chromatic whiteness captures the character Hudson and Guido Boggiani's attention. In a revealing coincidence, La Vuelta del Malón also appears, appears towards the end of my last novel, which is this one, L'idioma di Casal Damareiro. A short novel, which follows to Patagonia an Italian student of ethnolinguistics in search for the two last speakers of Gununa Yayuk, the language of the disappearing people Gununa Kuna, overnumbered by the Mapuches, but especially targeted by white settlers. Annibale, the ethno-linguistic, young linguistic, amazement in front of Della Valle's canvas comes close to a palinody after a whole story predicated on the scientific and cultural necessity of familiarizing with a totally alien way of considering, through language, a civilization relationship with its territory, its ancestors, its cosmogony. The indigenous language on the verge of disappearance progressively shows to the Western researcher its magical and musical component. Through its words, the language, the indigenous language, Gununa Kuna, establish a tie with the surrounding elements, express love and recognize their mortality with such intensity as to regulate their existence through prayers and taboos. The Gununa Yuyuk becomes the way the indigenous people sonically inhabit the huge wilderness of the Pampas, at times silent, at times swept by the winds. Bravi builds a tale of multiple loves and dubious endings, advocates with melancholy the full dignity of these vanishing Indians, and through his Italian protagonist wonders at the complexity of colonial history, which explains the Malone painted by the artist of Italian origins himself, Angel della Valle. So, to make a long story, very long story short, why I just learned how to do this diabolical thing. Why now? What do they speak to? To us. And what is the right? I like it. This is something I learned from a student of mine, so let me indulge. What is the role within the history of Italian settlements in South America? There's no time. Maybe we'll open to discussion, and that's it. And that's it.
Well,
let me see. Grazie. No. We'll have to answer the questions ourselves.
ok. Well, thank
That's
you.
it.
Ok, grazie. Più o meno siamo entro il margine dei 10 minuti che ci era stato concesso, quindi abbiamo ancora qualche minuto per una discussione, se volete anche fare una discussione complessiva sulla riunione, che certamente ha coperto dei temi di grande interesse relativi al Brasile e a questa grande emigrazione del nostro paese nel Brasile. Ok, quindi ci sono domande? Ok.
Right.
Question for you. The Luis Ruzzato, does he write in English, Portuguese, Italian?
La mia tesi.
Luis Ruzzato. Luis Rufato, scusa. Rufato.
Lui scrive, non so se lui scrive in italiano, penso che ha dei libri in italiano.
Sì,
ma
è tradotto in inglese forse?
No, penso che tradotto in italiano.
Sì?
Sì.
Ok.
Ma
E lui scrive anche romanzi o solo
romanzo, penso.
romanzi?
Sì.
Sì?
Lui scrive in portoghese per il giornale Il Paese.
Ah, ho capito.
Sì.
Ok.
Beh, anche Alessandra Vannucci ha scritto un libro in portoghese, poi scrive libri in italiano, in qualche altro. Ok.
I have a
tutte le
question
lingue,
for
in tutte le
Martino.
lingue.
Do you think this sort of turn in Italian literature towards looking at Latin America is a kind of new turn that moves away from North America and Italian immigration to North America, that this is a kind of new terrain for Italian authors and maybe even scholars?
I wondered that myself. I don't have the answer. On the one hand, well, I briefly showed Piero Brunello's book, which is the most revealing in terms of what, especially Venetian settlers in Espirito Santo, the massacres and genocides that they did against the indigenous population. So that is a history which needs to be known, you know. I wondered especially at the what are we to think and make of Italian settlers and immigrants in regards to other indigenous other indigenous presences. I remember here 5 years ago there were quite a few contributions on the relation between Italians and Aboriginals in Australia. I never came across anything about North America or Canada. I have come across something about the relation between Scandinavian settlers and Native Americans. Is this a new turn? I think in terms of Italo-based, Italo-tropic culture is more, as much as I admire and respect all of these writers, it's a bit of a fashionable trend, global trend. In fact, I briefly mentioned in my paper, which I hope we'll be able to publish in the proceedings, that I don't see in that respect this turn as an Italian citizen very different from what goes around the world now in terms of the global exhibits by Sebastião Salgado or the traveling world circus of the great Yanomami chief David Kopenawa and his great books, not in terms of what he says, but in terms of what all this indigenous wisdom is ladled out and gobbled down by our info-academic circus. So we can do conferences about this and we can publish this because there's a paying public. There's a paying audience to hear the stories. This is not to dispute the good intentions of all of this, especially Adrien Bravi, who is an Argentinian Italian, and maybe he, revealingly, he's the more subdued of the group. I think he has a larger perspective, but that's the first thing which comes.
Ok, thank you. Grazie, credo che abbiamo raggiunto il tempo per chiudere la sessione. Ringrazio anche la diligenza con cui gli autori hanno rispettato i limiti di tempo e ringrazio il pubblico per gli interventi che ha svolto. Quindi grazie a tutti e la sessione è chiusa.
Can you hear me? Okay, okay. No problem. We can start. You are the first of the panel? Yeah. Okay, we try. Thank you. Un attimo. One moment. Yes, read only. It's impossible.
Hola, hello? Hi, Luis. Can you hear us? Okay, perfect. Vado? Ok. So, welcome everybody, benvenuti a tutti e a tutte. Iniziamo questo panel virtuale e in presenza. We start now a virtual and in-person panel. This is a panel dedicated to the Italian identity in International Migration Museum. Our first speaker is Luis Vergata. Luis Vergata comes from a small town near Montevideo made up of peasant families descended from 20th century immigrants, mostly from Italy. He trained as an archaeologist at the Università della Repubblica and worked at the Museum of Pre-Columbian and Indigenous Art in Montevideo. And over the years, he began to curate exhibitions, including the first ethnohistorical exhibition and international archaeological exhibition of the country that is called Uruguay in Guarani. The first exhibition was in the Vatican City. His work experience actually leads him to be a museologist with a particular propensity for curating temporary exhibition. He has participated in more than 300 exhibition projects, most of which are socio-exhibition projects. For 4 years, he has been the director of the MUMI, Muraglia Alberta, Museo dell'emigrazione, Complesso Culturale and Area Archeologica of Muraglia Alberta, that he defined as social, cultural museum, archaeological and heritage space of co-construction, co-management, and polyphony dedicated to the movement, human mobility, identities, and interculturality. So, Luis, the floor is yours.
cultural. Y el punto número 5, el museo como agente activo y articulador.
I would like to outline some points that portray and synthesize the improvements that these social museological projects signify in order to serve society and its communities. From the social museology perspective, it is an instrument to visibilize, promote, and articulate cultural diversity, and an instrument which helps us dialogue about our historical memory, to take part as citizens in the support of social cohesion based on the plurality of identities. This project has 5 main points, whose titles I'm going to be telling you in a moment. The first aspect of this instrument is the expansion of the museum's raison d'être and to change its name, that is human mobility, territory, identity, democratization of exhibition spaces, and new narratives.
Bien. El punto número 1 aborda la ampliación temática y cambio de nombre. En este año contarles que empezamos un proceso político-administrativo dentro de la propia Intendencia de Montevideo para propiciar el cambio de nombre de la institución. Manteniendo nuestra sigla, pasaríamos a denominarnos como Museo de la Movilidad y las Identidades, MUMI. Con este cambio estaremos incorporando otras formas de movilidades que sucedieron en el territorio y que son fundamentales para nuestra sociedad, conocerlas en el presente, además de resaltar la relación siempre presente y profunda entre movimiento e identidad.
The first point would be the expansion of the raison d'être and change of the name. This year, we began a political administrative process to promote the change of name of the institution, maintaining our acronym, that is MUMI, MUMI. We would rename our museum as the Museum of Mobility and Identities. With this change, we will be incorporating all the forms of mobilities that have occurred in the territory and that are fundamental for our society to know. This would emphasize the importance of the relationship between movement and identity.
El segundo punto trata sobre la movilidad humana y la conexión entre la movilidad humana, el territorio y la identidad. El abordaje de la movilidad humana que proponemos va más allá de la migración, entendida básicamente como migración, y de los estados, naciones y sus fronteras actuales o más o menos recientes. Incluye otras formas y toma a los territorios y a las identidades culturales como aspectos indisociables para la comprensión de la historia larga, global y local de toda la humanidad. Una historia, sin lugar a duda, de movilidad humana. No sé si saben, pero el Uruguay es un país que configura un territorio que está marcado en su historia reciente por el colonialismo y el expansionismo europeo. Hoy entendemos fundamental construir nuestra historia desde el propio territorio, incluyendo a todas las identidades culturales que la habitaron y transitaron sus organizaciones, parte fundamental en la configuración de la sociedad actual. Trabajar la movilidad humana desde los propios territorios está en función de decolonizar los relatos que siguen invisibilizando y subordinando a otras identidades y perpetuando las injusticias e inequidades sociales y culturales.
Point number 2 would be human mobility, territory, identity. The approach to human mobility that we propose goes beyond migration and nation states and their current or more or less recent geographical borders. It includes other forms and takes territories and cultural identities, indivisible part of the long global history of humanity, a history of human mobility without doubt. Uruguay, this country, has been marked in its recent history by colonialism and European expansionism. We understand that it is fundamental to rethink our history from the territory itself, including all the cultural identities that inhabited and set foot on it. Their organizations as fundamental parts in the configuration of today's society. The idea is to decolonize history and to stop perpetrating injustices and social and cultural inequalities.
El tercer punto es la democratización de los espacios expositivos y nuevos relatos. Contarles que desde hace 3 años el museo ha venido cambiando su forma de trabajo y la concepción de espacios, partiendo de la premisa de que todas las personas están atravesadas por la movilidad propia y ajena, tiene algo que aportar para la comprensión de historias personales y locales, hasta grupales y globales. En función de ello, hemos generado estrategias para brindar herramientas curatoriales, museográficas, espacios definidos, etc., en función de favorecer la participación social y democratizar estos espacios públicos, y además de favorecer la co-construcción de relatos más amplios en donde las propias personas son las protagonistas.
Point number 3 is democratization of exhibition areas and news stories. For 3 years, this museum has been changing its way of working and the conception of its areas based on the premise that all people are influenced by their own and others' mobility. They have something to contribute to the understanding of personal and local histories. Based on this, we have generated curatorial and museographic strategies to favor social participation and promote further democratization of the museum's areas, so people themselves are the protagonists.
Para eso hemos orientado nuestras 3 pequeñas salas a trabajos de cooperación con la sociedad y la participación social. Está la sala comunidades, en donde trabajamos con comunidades históricas y recientes, articulando la diversidad. Después está la sala central, en donde trabajamos con distintos sectores de la sociedad para visibilizar y reflexionar temas que hacen a la comprensión amplia de la movilidad humana, las migraciones y otras formas también. Y la sala participativa es en donde el museo colabora solamente en recursos y en soporte museográfico. No se responsabiliza o tampoco hace injerencia sobre lo que tiene que ver los temas. Este trabajo de involucramiento social lo realizamos también junto a la Universidad de la República.
To do this, we have reorganized our working areas to include social participation. The communities room, for example, where we work with historical and recent communities, articulating diversity. Then there is the central room, where we work with different sectors of society to make visible or to visibilize and reflect on issues that contribute to a broad understanding of movement, mobility, migrations, and other forms. And the participation room, where the staff only collaborate with museographic resources and support. We carry out this work of social involvement along with the University of the Republic.
El cuarto punto es la co-construcción de un espacio simbólico y legitimador de la diversidad cultural. El MUMI, desde el año 2011, se encuentra junto al Complejo Cultural Muralla Abierta en un área arqueológica importante y simbólica de la ciudad. La misma alberga los restos del sistema de fortificaciones de la antigua ciudad colonial de San Felipe y Santiago de Montevideo y otros asociados a la etapa republicana, y todo ese conjunto fue declarado de monumento histórico. Podemos decir que es una antigua frontera colonial que da paso a un gran espacio intercultural público y arqueológico donde se generan y desarrollan, articulan también múltiples expresiones asociadas a la diversidad cultural de nuestra sociedad. Celebraciones de comunidades, históricas recientes, ferias, fiestas, congresos, teatros, realizaciones audiovisuales, performances artísticas, entre otras tantas actividades dedicadas a la movilidad y a las identidades.
Point number 4 is the creation of a symbolic and legitimizing space for cultural diversity since 2011. The MUMI Museum has been located next to the Muralla Abierta Cultural Center, an important and symbolic archaeological area of the city. It houses remains of the old colonial citadel of the San Felipe and Santiago of Montevideo city, among other elements from the Republican period. All of these declare historical monument. This historical area, which serves as connector between intercultural public heritage and archaeological space hosts different celebrations of communities, both historical and recent. We have fairs and festivals, different congresses, theater plays, audiovisual production, artistic performances, among many other dedicated to mobility and identities.
También funcionan programas sociales permanentes o temporales, como la olla popular Ciudad Vieja, destinada a servir un alimento caliente a vecinas y vecinos en contexto de vulnerabilidad alimenticia. Así como programas temporales como Flecha de Vida, de arco y flecha, que beneficia a mujeres que padecieron cáncer de mama, un mercado popular, una feria para celíacos, entre otros.
Our museum is also committed to addressing pressing social issues such as food insecurity and gender inequality. We have implemented various programs to support our community, including a community kitchen, providing warm, hot meals to vulnerable individuals. And also the program Flechas de Vida, that is Arrows of Lives, which offers support to breast cancer survivors. Additionally, we organize events like farmers markets and fairs dedicated to people with celiac disease.
Hasta hace poco había en el espacio patrimonial y museístico un único gran mural que representaba una escena preciosa de la migración en el puerto de Montevideo, en este caso de la migración europea. La semana pasada, y luego de un concurso abierto y público, se incorporaron al espacio 2 murales más. Uno sobre la migración reciente latinoamericana y el otro sobre la movilidad forzada, trata esclavista y la identidad afro-uruguaya. Restan concretar en ese espacio simbólico murales sobre los pueblos originarios de este territorio y otros que serán menores sobre migración, campo-ciudad, exilio, migración interplanetaria, etc.
In this cultural center, there is a very large mural painted by a local artist, which depicts a scene of European immigration. This is a very lovely mural. However, nowadays we have included 2 more works of art. After an open public contest, we have added 2 new murals. One highlighting recent Latin American migration and another depicting forced migration, the slave trade, and Afro-Uruguayan identity. Future plans in relation to this include murals on indigenous peoples, rural to urban migration and exile.
Y bueno, el último punto es el punto del museo como agente activo y articulador. Por último, en este punto quería contarles que el museo participa, así como genera y desarrolla múltiples espacios de articulación y de cooperación. Entre estos espacios están los generados por la Universidad de la República del Uruguay para la instalación de un laboratorio de investigación arqueológica, la sede del Centro de Estudios Interdisciplinarios Migratorios y próximamente la de un laboratorio de museografía y expografía. Asimismo, coopera con otros espacios universitarios como archivología, bibliografía. Esta modalidad de inclusión de la Universidad Pública del Uruguay dentro del museo es algo novedoso en el ámbito local y además de la cooperación técnica constituye una valiosa herramienta en un medio local que es carente de desarrollo de disciplinas museísticas.
The final point is number 5, is the museum as an active agent and social connector. Finally, the museum participates in, generates, and develops multiple spaces for social articulation and cooperation. Along with the University of the Republic of Uruguay, we are working on the installation of an archaeological research laboratory, a Center for Interdisciplinary Migration Studies, the CEIMI, and to be opened soon, the Museography and Exhibition Design Laboratory. We also cooperate with other university departments. This inclusion of the university within the museum's work is something new in the local context, and in addition to technical cooperation, constitutes constitutes a valuable tool in a local environment which lacks development museological disciplines.
Por otro lado, participa en representación del Departamento de Cultura, del cual depende la institución, y junto a otros departamentos y divisiones de la propia Intendencia de Montevideo, en la Comisión o Gabinete sobre Movilidad. En el mismo, entre gabinetes, se desarrollan políticas públicas dirigidas fundamentalmente a las personas recién inmigradas o migradas al país.
On the other hand, this museum represents the Department of Culture together with other departments and divisions of the Montevideo City Council in the Commission or Cabinet on Mobility. This structure develops public policies primarily aimed at people who have recently migrated to the country.
Asimismo, el museo en el año 2021 crea la mesa organizadora del mes de las migraciones, en la que participa también la Organización Internacional para las Migraciones, OIM-ONU, la Secretaría de Equidad Étnico-Racial y Población Migrante, la Intendencia de Montevideo, el municipio B y la sociedad civil organizada en la red de apoyo al migrante, un conglomerado de ONG que trabajan con población migrante. Junto a ellos creamos el mes de las migraciones, que va del 18 de noviembre al 18 de diciembre, que es el Día Internacional de las Personas Migrantes. Un mes que no sabe de fronteras, que constituye una herramienta para la participación social, en donde colectivos, comunidades, centros, espacios de formación, artistas, científicos, población civil, participa con actividades de toda índole sobre la temática en la ciudad de Montevideo. Y ahora en otras partes también del país, en una agenda compartida que posibilita además tener muchas dimensiones sobre la movilidad humana.
In 2021, the museum established the organizing committee for the month of migrations, which includes the International Organization for Migration, the IOM, the Secretariat for Ethnic and Racial Equality and Migrant Populations of the Montevideo City Council, Municipality B, and civil society organized in the Migrant Support Network, a group of NGOs working with migrant populations. Together, we created the month of migrations from November 18th to December 18th, International Migrations Day. This month transcends borders and promotes social participation. Collectives, communities, training centers, artists, scientists, and the general public participate with all kinds of activities in the capital and other parts of the country, sharing an agenda aimed at understanding human mobility from different perspectives.
Por último, desde noviembre del 2023, el MEI, junto a la Secretaría de Equidad Étnico-Racial y Población Migrante, ambos de la Intendencia de Montevideo, coordina la unidad temática de cultura de Mercociudades, que es un organismo que nuclea a más de 400 ciudades del espacio cultural del Mercosur, pero también de Latinoamérica. El proyecto presentado, denominado Movilidad y Cultura, está ahora en estado de ejecución y apunta a la realización de un inventario de expresiones culturales asociadas a la movilidad en ciudades de este espacio cultural. Activos culturales que serán visibles en una plataforma virtual en donde las distintas ciudades participantes podrán georreferenciar estos importantes activos de nuestro continente.
Finally, since November 2023, the MEI Museum, together with the Secretariat for Ethnic and Racial Equality and Migrant Populations of the Montevideo City Council, has been coordinating the Technical Culture Unit of Mercociudades. This organization brings together more than 400 cities in the cultural space of Mercosur and Latin America. The presented project called Mobility and Culture, which is currently underway, aims at create an inventory of cultural expressions associated with mobility in cities within this region. These cultural assets will be visible on a virtual platform where the different participating cities can georeference these important assets of our continent.
Hasta aquí mi presentación. Quería aprovechar este espacio con colegas e instituciones hermanas para contar esta suerte de laboratorio que está haciendo el museo, advirtiendo también que todo lo que se ha nombrado se ha realizado en un contexto de recursos siempre muy escaso. y que inevitablemente todos los que estamos aquí sabemos que las fórmulas pueden sostenerse cuando generamos un sistema que sea capaz de ello. Ese será mi gran reto en los 2 próximos años que me queda de dirección. Por falta de imágenes de hoy, les invitamos a ver nuestra página web, www.mumi.montevideo.com, y nuestro Instagram, Mumi Museo, donde podrán ver imágenes y videos de lo hablado en este espacio.
To conclude, I wanted to take advantage of this opportunity with colleagues from related institutions to share all the improvements the museum has been working with. I would also like to point out that everything I have mentioned has been achieved in a context of very limited resources. And inevitably, we all know that formulas can only be sustained when we generate a system capable of doing so. That will be my biggest challenge in the next 2 years of my directorship. We invite you, we don't have images today, so we invite you to check our webpage, www.mumi.montevideo.com, and our Instagram, Museo Mumi, where you can see photos and videos of all our work.
Por último, y es algo que hemos conversado con mi colega Nico Bielo, que está ahí presente, a la cual le mando un gran saludo, es la necesidad de generar una red amplia de museos de la movilidad humana que integre no solo a los museos de las migraciones, inmigraciones y emigraciones, sino también a museos que versen sobre la movilidad forzada, los éxodos, la trata esclavista y museos de comunidades migrantes también. Para todos, muchísimas gracias. Ha sido un placer compartir este espacio con todos ustedes.
Finally, and this is something I have discussed with my colleague Mimi Coviello, we can see her from here, and we send her our great hello and regards. There is a need to create a broad network of museums of human mobility, which would include not only migration museums, but also museums focused on forced displacement, exodus, exile, and museums of migrant communities. To all of you, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Luis. I don't know if you can hear the applause you received for your intervention. And if you want, you can stay with us and listen to other speakers. Or if you have to leave, I can ask to the public if there are some questions for you, or we can postpone all the questions after the 3 speakers. I can't hear you. Okay.
Sorry, can you? Yes, could you please repeat a part of the questions?
You wanted, yes, maybe we can do some question now and then. Ah no, si è bloccato. Freeze. Freeze. Yes, no, Teams, not Zoom. No. No? Okay, you are here with us? Yeah, okay, so there is a question for you.
Thank you for your very interesting presentation. My question has to do with the incredible expansion of your mission and your vision. It's almost as if this museum is representing so many things for so many people. I was fascinated with the inclusion of the medical aspects, the breast cancer, the celiac disease. And I was wondering about how this came about. I mean, it's really quite different from the missions of some of the other museums, I mean, I really applaud it because it looks like you're really trying to be as inclusive as possible. But I'm wondering about how you can extend yourself so much, especially with limited resources.
Me llama mucho la atención el tema de...
¿Qué tal? Bueno, muchas gracias, muy linda pregunta. Bueno, tengo casi como 20 años, no sé si se dijo hoy, en la parte del currículum, o sea que tenía unos bastantes años. Fui descubriendo al iniciarme en lo que es el trabajo de museos, el poderoso instrumento que es para empoderar al resto de la ciudadanía.
In these 20 years he has been working here, he has found that this museum is a tool for the empowerment of the people here.
Justamente en esta etapa acá en este museo hay un tema para desarrollar que es universal, o sea, obviamente está en clave local, está en clave territorial, en clave global, hay muchas claves intersubjetivas porque no todo el mundo lo vive y en ese sentido todos tienen algo para decir. Con lo que tiene que ver con las acciones sociales, durante la pandemia, que inició mi gestión, a los 2 meses, o sea, había que hacerse cargo porque tenemos un espacio sumamente grande en Ciudad Vieja, podíamos colaborar con los vecinos que estaban pasando mal y que hoy siguen pasando mal.
Okay, there is this interconnection of different perspectives which articulate the work here in the museum. He started working around when the pandemic started, and it was crucial for the people around the area of the museum to actually collaborate in order to okay, so they could collaborate with other people who were not receiving for them to receive meals. So it was like a very collaborative, and the effort was related to a lot of people in the area.
Luego, mi gran inspiración son el fenómeno de los museos comunitarios, sobre todo latinoamericanos, donde la falta de representación en las instituciones públicas, culturales, hace que también, o sea, se manifieste esta voluntad de generar espacio, adoptar la palabra museo para legitimar la propia identidad cultural. Me parece la definición más hermosa de museo y es muy inspiradora y hacia ese lugar nosotros hacia la construcción de un museo social.
He finds this idea of communitary museum, which is we can allocate here in some regions of Latin America. He finds this idea very inspiring. So for people to be welcome and to let be part of the project and work as una comunidad, ¿no? Work as a community.
Any other question? No? Okay. So thank you, Luis. Thank you for the translation. Now I have to ask which is the next. Andiamo in loco? Ok. È una domanda. Stefan è pronto o andiamo con lei? Va benissimo. Ok. So thank you so much. Now I would like to introduce Gege Leme Joseph. She's an architect and a urbanist from FAUUSP, Brazil. Okay. with further credential in set and production design from AFDA, South Africa, and museology from the University of Leicester, United Kingdom. As a senior program manager at the International Coalition of Site Conscience, she oversees programs in Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, and coordinates the Migration Museum Network. Gege began her cultural career as a theater and exhibition designer in 2000, and moving to South America in 2003, where she contributed to major museum and heritage projects addressing themes of apartheid, colonialism, and slavery. In 2013, she founded Match, Museum for Change, a consultancy focusing on contested history and social impact, where she led the conceptual development of Museum da História e da Cultura Afro-Brasileira, and the grassroots project like Museu do Samba. She also served on the ICOM Brazil and ICOM CAMOC board, fostering City Museum collaboration on migration. She is one of the old friends of our institution, and we are very happy that she can be here with us in person. So, Gege, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Georgia. I will speak in English today. So I will speak about the Migration Museums Network on the backdrop of these discussions that we are having about Italian diaspora. So I will try to mix my perspective with museum making that is about migration and, as Louise was saying, human mobility. How do we bring this all together as a network? Because I think the collective perspective is also interesting in this case. So for those of you who don't know, the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience, or ICSC, we are a global network of historic sites and museums that champions memory, truth, and justice through capacity building, networking opportunities, and grants. We equip our members, whom we call Sites of Conscience, to provide their communities with transformative experiences that help them to counter false narratives, embrace more inclusive histories, and advocate for just, equitable systems today. MUMA, MEI are members, Museu da Imigração, Apartheid Museum, Ellis Island, German Museum of Immigration, so they're all Sites of Conscience, so we're here amongst our peers and friends. So the Migration Museums Network is a global thematic initiative that we launched as the coalition in 2019, and it brings together like-minded migration museums around the world, aiming at exchanging and strengthening capacities, practices of museums working with migration and human mobility to counter discrimination, racism, and xenophobia, and also to foster equity and inclusion, influence public policies, and protect migrants' rights. So it's a bit on the big spectrum as well, as you were saying, addressing many purposes. And I would have loved to have invited Luis to join the network, because he was saying we need a network, so it would be good. So today, as a thematic network within the coalition, we bring together 24 museums in 18 countries and 5 regions, and we link migration and the agenda of heritage, culture, historical memory, peace building, and we are working across, as you can imagine, a diversity of geographical, cultural, and historical contexts. Let me just, can I, sorry, because I have already, next one. Yeah, so this is about the coalition and the Migration Museums Network. I think it's also important to talk about my personal perspective today, so I just want to do a brief pause, because I think this surpasses everything that I'm hearing and how I'm going to interpret what I'm saying. As Georgia said, I'm a Brazilian architect, urbanist, and museologist for 25 years, working across Latin America, the Caribbean, and Africa. I live in South Africa, so I'm a migrant myself, and I'm also the descendant of Italian immigrants from Veneto, Toscana, and Emilia-Romagna, who were attracted in the late 1800s as part of Brazil's incentive for Italians to settle in agricultural areas. So while I cannot claim to have expertise in the representations of Italian diaspora in all relevant Migration Museums Network museums, because there are several and across many regions. I will use my personal lens to pose some questions about how we're represented and how we interact with the world as Italian diaspora and Italian communities outside of Italy. As you know, Brazil holds a large population of Italian descendants with significant impact on culture and society. Italian immigration has profoundly shaped our lives and traditions, arts, music, architecture, cuisine, entrepreneurship, technology, agriculture, and more. Thank you. And it's interesting for me, for the first time, to stand here at MEI, which is a museum dedicated to the perspectives of immigration. So looking at stories like my own family from the point of view of departure, and also of other communities of diasporas around the world. Because as a descendant of Italian immigrants, sometimes our heritage and our histories, they are often romanticized by tales of immigrant hardship, discrimination, exclusion, resilience, and also forging a sense of Italianness within a new and complex cultural fabric. In the 19th century, these incentives by Brazil to European immigrants also responded to an often less discussed agenda to whiten Brazil's then and now predominantly non-European population. Italian immigrants and their descendants at that time quickly adopted very Luso-Brazilian discriminatory attitudes towards Black and indigenous populations, embracing a white and Italian identity became a strategy to secure close? Oh God, now I can see. Could you hear me? Okay. It was a strategy to secure a socioeconomic privilege within a deeply racist and elitist society. So today, with demographics not far from those of the late 1800s, my Italian roots that once were a marker of otherness in a country that was very discriminatory afford me the privilege of a perceived whiteness within Brazil's systemic unequal social structures. And while my experience of my heritage is often one of pride, of being descendant of these Italians who came and to fare l'America, as they used to say, I cannot ignore that there is a whole lot of intersectional experiences and heritage and contributions of non-white Italian descendants in Brazil, and possibly pretty much elsewhere where diasporas are located. They are much less publicly celebrated by Italian descendants and others. And I would like to pose a question why. And I think there was some discussions raised in previous panels about this, and it's something we must not let slip from the back of our minds. Diasporic Italian experiences are inextricably linked to migration, hardships, discrimination, and otherness, and resilience as a continuum. But understanding that having experienced discrimination does not make diasporic Italians immune to perpetrating discrimination. It's something that is essential to the work that we do as migration museums, and to the understanding of any migrant condition and how we as humans deal with coming from the heritage of being migrants, and how we deal with other migrants that come after us. So with that, I would like to quickly introduce the Migration Museums Network. And I'll do it chronologically because it's interesting how they're blocked chronologically within the network. The first 13 out of the 24 museums that I'm going to talk about today are immigration museums, as they're named immigration. They use the I am in the beginning of the word, largely based in the Americas, Asia, and the Pacific. And they have emerged between the 1980s and the 2000s. The Chinese Historical Society of America, founded in '63 in San Francisco as a pioneer initiative to memorialize Chinese American history and contributions. Angel Island Immigration Station in San Francisco, also open to raise awareness of the complex experience of immigration to America through the Pacific in 1983. Museo de la Inmigración in Buenos Aires, Argentina, also founded in 1985 in the Old Immigrants Hostelry to represent European, Asian, and African immigration to Argentina from the 19th century onwards. The Migration Museum in Adelaide, even though they call themselves migration, they are largely about immigration and settlement history in South Australia, weaving colonialism, immigration, original peoples, and contested histories. They opened in 1986. The Wing Luk Museum of the Asian Pacific American Experience, which started in 1987 but opened as a museum in 2008 in Seattle, to showcase the histories and cultures and art of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. And now they are very committed to promoting social and racial equity. The Lower East Side Tenement Museum, founded in 1998 in New York, highlights the diverse impact of American immigration through immersive storytelling. And it was the Tenement Museum who led the founding of the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience in 1989, and also co-founded with us later, 20 years later, the Migration Museums Network. The Ellis Island National Museum of Immigration in New York as well, represented, we were going to have them today here, opened in 1990 as a living monument to the story of American people in the former immigration complex, and explores human movement through diverse immigration journeys and how they shape the story of Americans. The Musée National de l'Histoire de l'Immigration in Paris was launched in 2007, but in the making since 1990, and highlights immigration history, its impacts and fronts, addressing topics like law, migration, demographics, economics, culture, racism, discrimination, slavery, and colonization. And in 98, the Immigration Museum in Melbourne opened, also located in the Immigration in the former Administrative Center of Immigration and Trade, which was a very complex site of very complex history to tell the story of immigration from the 19th century as well. Museu da Imigração do Estado de São Paulo, which we heard about in the last panel, which opened in 98 in São Paulo, also immigrant hostelry with an initial aim to celebrate Brazil's great immigration era from Europe, the Middle East, Asia, and the Pacific, which is a period we're talking about 1897 to the 20th century, and its impact in modern São Paulo. Even though their work has evolved quite a lot over time, this was the initial focus. The Canadian Museum of Immigration opened in 2015 in Halifax, Canada, to also tell the stories of Canada's past immigration, more focused on the 20th century, 1928 to 71, and its connections to present migration. And the Arab American National Museum opened in 2005 in Dearborn, and is the only US museum that highlights the Arab American history, culture, and contributions from the 19th century. And the Tea Plantation Museums and Archive, founded in 2007 in Sri Lanka, to talk about Indian migration, labor, gender, and heritage of tea plantation communities. So these 13 museums, they emerged about a century after the migration they represent, focusing on people's movements from Europe, Asia, and the Pacific, and into a lesser extent the Middle East, highlighting their contributions to shaping their new arrival places. So as they all say, they initially tried to honor immigrants and consolidate their place in their new nations, presenting this story of immigration as a unifying narrative of migration, as a socially integrative experience, an idea that helped, in a way, romanticize the experience of groups like diasporic Italians and the shaping of the new Italian identities in the new places as essential pieces of a melting pot community. However, these narratives were often also exclusionary. They omitted experiences of marginalized groups like Afro-descendants, indigenous people, and others, themselves victims of forced migration, as our colleague was talking about, and displacement, enslavement, and colonization. They are located in sites that are historically connected to this migration, so they're also quite symbolically exclusionary. And in response to social justice movements, later, these museums began reinterpreting these sites in a more holistic way to address contemporary migration, diverse movements, as well as to explore the connections with difficult histories. So their role expanded, and they became more critical of the complexities of the stories that they're dealing with and their responsibilities toward collective well-being. So Italian immigration are presented in museums in Halifax, New York, San Francisco, Seattle, Sao Paulo, Paris, Buenos Aires, Melbourne, and Adelaide, but they're also represented across several immigration and migration museums across Europe and beyond. So immigration museums, called as such, they are more focused on in Europe. They were here, and they emerged from 2005 onwards with the German Immigration Center. MoMA also in 2005, I believe, right? Yeah. Yeah, the Galata, and then in 2022, MEI. Then the Red Star Line Museum, in Antwerp, also opened in 2013, talking about hopes and dreams and immigration through the port of Antwerp, especially towards America, and Immigration Museum, Red Star Line Museum, and Gdynia in Poland, also talking about immigration of Poles worldwide and viewing immigration now as a more dynamic process and how it connects, how the immigration of Poles connects to present-day immigration into Poland. So the 4 immigration museums in our network are all established post-2000, and they're both based in Europe. They highlight hardships faced by immigrants, their resilience, and the impact in the new societies, and also connect back to Europe and emphasize a global circulation of people, past and present, as a dynamic force shaping societies, individuals alike, through time. And they try to deal with challenges of making these connections while trying not to conflate past immigration with present immigration, because they're contextually different, but how they can learn from each other and use the past to understand the present. And then more recently, migration museums that call themselves as such without the M or the E, they focus on the circulation of people as a continuous process that blurs lines between immigration and migration and focus on human movement. One such museum is Migration Museum in the United Kingdom. It was launched to explore the movement of people and how it shapes Britain's communities and the nation. It tries to address migration as a key contemporary issue, full of complexity in a polarized society, and offer insights into where Britain is going. Migratie Museum Migration in Brussels also talks about the role of all migrants shaping Brussels, and is very focused on personal stories and how they. I want to go over. Sorry. And then the last museum that we have as a migration museum is the Phoenix in Rotterdam, which is yet to open in 2025, but it's a very interesting experience because it's the first museum dedicated to telling the story of migration through art, and in a very thematic way, focused on love, on identity and belonging, and the experience of human mobility. So these museums, they are trying to create welcoming spaces to share and reflect on stories of others and themselves, tackle migration as a central issue in polarized societies, and embrace innovative storytelling through art and other means of storytelling. So we were talking about, when I was listening to Luis, so we have 3 interesting museums in our network that are talking about the transatlantic slave trade. They are based in Africa and in Asia. One such museum is Maison d'Esclaves, which discusses the role of a house in the slave trade and with all its complexities, and it's based in Senegal. We have several sites pertaining to the Ghana Museums and Monuments Board in our network, but the Cape Coast Castle as an example here, it focuses on European arrival in Africa and their interaction with local communities and all the connections that happened between that, the diaspora, and all present social issues. And also the Tibet Museum that deals with Chinese occupation of Tibet and tries to not only preserve Tibetan heritage, but also protect freedom and talk about human rights and values that are important to preserve Tibetan culture elsewhere. I will come to a close now, just with final reflection, saying that migration museums face many challenges addressing all these connections between the causes and effects of several movements, but also colonialism, slavery, conflict, occupations, and the difficult stories and other opportunities for collective critical reflection on the impact of these histories on the migratory flows, past and present. It would be interesting for us to explore the role of Italians in the diaspora and how these historical and contemporary movements and therefore their own collective responsibility as a global community, especially hearing the presentations that came before, how do we as Italian diasporic communities fit within all the difficult stories and the circulation, global circulation of people. So I will say to close a bit faster that I think these museums that deal with migration, they're a new typology, they're largely 40 years old from onwards. They seek now to bridge tensions between immigration narratives and aim to tell stories that are not singular, that don't have a unified perspective and that bring complexity. But they also understand that migration history is instrumentalized and distorted to serve political agendas. So these museums, they try to challenge incomplete narratives and emphasize the interconnectedness of migration stories that focus not only on the big stories, but also on marginalized communities' perspectives. I think I will just give a final citation that I saw in a site that when I was doing a bit of research, this website in Brazil called NCM, where it says, "We Italian descendants can in no way fail to recognize our privileged status in Brazilian society, adopting concrete actions personally and collective to minimize, wherever possible, the social differences arising from a historical process in which Black people and other racial groups have always been marginalized, and that our social ascension didn't just happen because of our ancestors were good and strong workers, but also because they occupied a space that used to be exclusive to white Brazilians." And with that, I think it's a call to all of us working with museums to talk about human movement and migration, and as part of the Italian diaspora, that it's a global story, it's our collective story, and these stories are interconnected, and we all have a responsibility to use this interconnectedness to promote social cohesion and social justice globally. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gege. I'm so sorry that Marcelo Huernos is not here now, because this morning he speaks a lot about what his museum is doing on a project about the new identity of Argentina and the Black Argentina and the interaction between different kind of migration in the past and now. Yeah. And so I would like to ask you if you have some question for Gege? No? There are no questions? No? Okay. So maybe just one. Yes, perfect. Yeah, right. Wait. On the microphone, please.
Yeah. Sorry. My name is Elizabeth. It was a wonderful presentation to understand how many of these museums there are in the world and the difference between immigration and migration, which there are differences. I'm interested to know how many of them are actually independent museums, or ones created from larger institutions? Because I know the one from Melbourne, the Immigration Museum, is actually part of
Victoria.
Museums Victoria. So it's a branch of it. I'd be interested to know how many are independent and ones that are connected to larger institutions.
I will say to you that a minority, but there is a very interesting aspect about the making of these museums, that even though they are largely public, and especially these ones because these are, they are museums of scale, they are not community museums, but they started as community museums, and I can tell you 90% of them. It's like I did a much larger presentation about the network 2 years ago, where I could give a little bit more of this history of each one. Most of them started through civil society mobilization and demand. And then eventually they managed to find a level of institutionalization that allowed them to, you know, because at the same time it was an interesting proposition for states to create this kind of, you know, it's a way to say that's how we forge our identity, the idea of this consolidated national identity, which is super contested. One interesting aspect of the Immigration Museum in Melbourne is how much I would say that 80% of the work that they do is completely done in collaboration with the communities. They are, for me, very unique in the way they work. I think they're very innovative. They have been working with communities in terms of redeveloping the city post-COVID, bringing people back to the inner CBD of Melbourne that was quite hit by the pandemic and also other aspects. They do collective gardening in the city, and they do all these initiatives and also foster entrepreneurship. They do all these initiatives to bring the community from various walks of life to work together and get to know each other, and to then start not being a melting pot, but all bring their own contributions. I think there are other very interesting examples within the network. One is Museu da Imigração de São Paulo, who's doing stellar work, very, very deep, like self-questioning in terms of the identity of the building itself, because the building was, as we say in Portuguese, a tool of the whitening policy. It's a symbol of this whitening policy of the government, and very courageously the museum has been looking into that, and we've been actually working together in a few projects to look together into that. So there are lots of things being done. Unfortunately, I don't have time to tell everything that's being done, but they are state-led. They have been, most of them, initiated by communities, and they are, I think they try to stay very true to that connection to the ground in terms of social service, but also in terms of questioning constantly their purpose and the kind of unifying identity they. Okay, sorry.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, but now we have to move to Stephen Lin, that is waiting for us online. And so if you have any other question for Gege, we can speak after. So, hi, Stephen. Can you hear us?
Hello.
Hello. Okay.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, you're welcome. Now I'm going to introducing you. Stephen Lin is director of American Family Immigration History Center, the Statue of Liberty Ellis Island Foundation. Having started his career in the corporate sector, Stephen embraced his passion for history and storytelling when he joined the foundation team on July 2015. Under Stephen's leadership, the History Center's team is an indispensable resource for visitors exploring their family heritage. Stephen holds an BA in American history. Armed with a deep knowledge of Ellis Island and the Ellis Island immigrant experience, Stephen is a frequent guest speaker and interview subject for location, national and international media. So, Stephen, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. I will share my screen very quickly so that you do not have to look at my face the entire time. Okay. So, thank you for inviting me. I wish I could be there in person in Genova because it is very, very cold in New York this morning, but we will make the best with what we have. I would like to talk about the Italian presence at Ellis Island, both now in the museum and back when Ellis Island was an immigration station. And again, I am the director of the History Center on Ellis Island. This is an on-site and online research facility. And our foundation works in partnership, as Gigi mentioned, with the National Park Service, who curate the larger museum. And this partnership between a nonprofit and the public sector itself is a testament in a way to the Italian diaspora and its presence on Ellis Island. Because in 1982, President Ronald Reagan asked Lee Iacocca, who is the son of Italian immigrants from Campania, to help fund the restoration and rehabilitation of the Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island. Lee Iacocca's father, Nicola Iacocca, immigrated not just once, but several times. He was what we would refer to as a bird of passage. First time in 1903, then in 1910, then finally in 1921 with his Italian wife. So in a very real way, the presence of an immigration museum on Ellis Island is a testament to the presence of Italian immigrants on Ellis Island in the early 20th century. Italian immigration in the United States, from a very simplified point of view, is one that grew as technology and opportunity rose to meet motivation. So early on, not as many Italians were coming over. The technology of traveling such long distances was not as safe. As we get to those Ellis Island peak years, when Ellis Island opened in 1892, we start seeing a major wave of Italians, so much so that even if we are only talking about Port of New York, during Ellis Island peaks years roughly, we have almost 4 million Italian arrivals in our searchable database that is online. By that point, most Italians coming over were from southern Italy. Most Italians coming over earlier in the 1820s through the 1870s, they were from the north, but Ellis Island records, we were primarily dealing with records of people coming from the south. And because this is the largest ethnic group in our database, because the presence is so large in American history, the presence inside of the museum, as curated by the National Park Service, is also quite large. There are many examples like the picture on the right-hand side of this slide showing Mulberry Street in Little Italy. It gives you just as much of an idea of how vibrant these communities were, how vibrant for good or for bad these neighborhoods were, just how crowded they could be. And also, just in the city of New York, we're talking about an overwhelming impact from a community and a diaspora.
Stephen, sorry. Stephen, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
We can see only the first slide of your presentation.
Oh dear. Let me,
I think you must enter and...
When I was testing earlier, it would work, but let me try again.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Can we see the slides moving from one page to another now? Or is only the first slide?
No, we are on the third slide now.
But and can you see when I move to the next page?
Try to move the next page.
Okay.
No.
Can you see the page?
Now we are again on the third page.
Okay. Let me see how to fix this.
It seems you are not in the presentation mode.
Okay. Is this... Do the slides move now? From one to the other?
No, we see your mouse moving. But we are still...
But not the actual... but it does not show that I am in presentation mode for you.
No.
Wonder if...
Okay, so Stefan, we have your presentation here. We try to share.
Okay,
And
maybe this is
you
better.
just say next slide, please.
I can say prossima.
Yeah, prossima or next slide is the same. Okay, now we try to share it.
Okay, I'm sorry about that, everyone. We did a brief test this morning, but if we go to the third slide.
Okay, let's go.
So you can see the third slide with the picture of the man standing in front of the statue.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a picture of Lee Iacocca, who founded our foundation. The political ethos of that time under President Reagan was to form public-private partnerships. And so he reached out to Lee Iacocca, who is the famous industrialist, to refurbish the Statue of Liberty and to refurbish Ellis Island in order to build an immigration museum here. So as I was saying, the presence of a museum itself on Ellis Island is testament to somebody whose parents were part of the Italian diaspora. Because Lee Iacocca's father, as you can see on the three examples to the left, he arrived 3 times in the United States, back and forth, 1903, 1910, and 1921. So without the Italian diaspora, there would probably not be an Italian presence on Ellis Island in the museum today. And we can see the next slide. So the Italian wave of immigration became larger during the 19th century as technology and motivation collided. Earlier on, it took much longer, of course, to travel across the Atlantic, so it was not as safe or as convenient. Finally, you have the Ellis Island peak years, when Ellis Island opened in 1892. Ellis Island's largest ethnic group is Italians. Almost 4 million Italians are inside of our searchable database and who were processed at Ellis Island, predominantly from the South. By that point in time, the immigration coming out of Italy was predominantly Southern, and we can talk about that in a couple of more slides. So if we go to the next slide, please. Because this is a very large group in terms of the number of people and because of their influence, their presence inside of the museum is large, both in terms of physical documentation and in talking about the narrative surrounding the Italian diaspora. By 1890, 90% of New York Department of Public Works employees were Italian immigrants. So the roads that we walk on every day here in the city, the pipes that bring us water and heat, these were more likely than not installed by Italian immigrants. And also during those Ellis Island peak years, millions of dollars were being sent back from America to Italy. So it's not just the goods and services and the value that Italian immigrants were adding to the American economy. This also had a reciprocal effect on the Italian economy as well. So by 1920, because of this big wave of Italian immigration, over 10% of the foreign-born US population was Italian. And if we head to the next slide, we'll get a little bit deeper into the complexities of that, because I don't want people to think, as many, at least in the United States, do, that immigration or migration happens in a straight line from point A to point B. Between 1/3 and 1/2 of Italian immigrants became ritornati. They would either stay permanently in Italy when they returned, or they would make several trips like Lee Iacocca's father did. And the museum itself documents that the journey of migration did not only happen at Ellis Island. In the photograph to the right-hand side of this slide, we have people arriving at the central rail station in Milan. Perhaps they're going to Genova, perhaps they're going to Marseille or another port. But the migrant's journey consisted of several steps. And it's also important to note that for many people, the United States was not a final destination. It was only one step. Many posters, like the one on the left hand of this slide, show that there were many options available and many popular options for the Italian diaspora, including, as Luis mentioned, Montevideo, Buenos Aires, other places in the Western Hemisphere. And so it's also important, I believe, that American visitors to the Ellis Island Museum realize this as well. Ellis Island is a very small part of the picture, and America, the United States of America itself, is a smaller part of a much larger migration journey. And if we go to the next slide, we can see another photograph that's in the museum, another large photograph showing people going to the Immigrant Aid Society in Naples before they embarked on their journey to America. And the museum itself explores a lot of the push and pull forces that drove migration. What is pushing people out of Italy? What might be pulling people to places like New York or Montevideo? There are some special circumstances at different times that would affect these motivations. We see a lot of Italian immigration in our records from the 1930s that was the result of political developments in Italy during that time frame. But during Ellis Island peak years, the primary motivation for many Italian immigrants that we have in our records and that we show in the museum was economic. And there is a quote taken from an oral history of an immigrant displayed prominently in the museum that says, "America was a big deal in Italy. Everybody thought everybody was rich in America. The Italian people, they thought America was gold." There is this notion that the streets are paved with gold that we hear about all the time. And if we go to the next slide, we will understand a little bit better that with any journey, on the other side of hope is often disappointment. For the majority of immigrants, Italian or otherwise, there were no streets paved with gold. And the way that the museum portrays that is through these photographs by an Ellis Island clerk named Augustus Sherman. It gives us a very vulnerable human side to this story. This little girl in the photograph is an Italian immigrant who arrived in 1926, and you can see what the experience is doing to her emotionally. Also from this quote from an oral history, we can see Felice Taldone saying, "I left my mother, and you cry for your mother all the time. So I wrote my mother a letter from Ellis Island, and I told her I got off. I told her I got a job, and it made my mother strong." Only 2% of people who were processed at Ellis Island were ultimately deported. But the experience that these individuals had at Ellis Island was not one of certainty or success. Because from the time you set foot on Ellis Island, even before when you were being ferried across the harbor, you were being examined. And you were aware of the examination. And if we go to the next slide, we can see another photo that I believe is also in Il Museo Galata of an Italian family looking for their lost baggage on Ellis Island. And you can see the chaos of traveling with small children. To travel with small children now is not easy, but to travel back then aboard a ship, it must have been quite harrowing for this mother. And what our research team can do when we look at these photos, standing in the doorways and the hallways in which these people stood around 120 years ago, is if we zoom in and we look at the name that is recorded on her baggage, we can actually see what this family's name is. If we go to the next slide, we can see a ship manifest that traveled with this family. It's very small to read, so if we go to the next slide, we can see that these families' names are recorded at the very top of the list. There is Anna Sciacchettano and her 3 children, Paolo, Maria, and Domenico. From the manifest that traveled with them aboard the ship that was used to inspect them on Ellis Island, we can get a more complete story than a photograph can tell. We know that this family is from Agrigento in Sicily. We know that they sailed from Messina. We know that they're headed to Scranton. Scranton is a very industrialized town in eastern Pennsylvania, which was a major receptacle for the Italian diaspora. We talked about Lee Iacocca. His family actually immigrated to the same region in Pennsylvania as well. And we can see that this family is traveling with only $5. If we go to the next slide, we will see, in addition to the paperwork examination that you underwent at Ellis Island, they underwent a physical inspection, starting with their eyes, as you can see in this photo, and then a complete inspection from the soles of your feet to the very top of your head. And this is where the concept of different national identities come into play, because the American inspectors and the American public had a concept of what it meant to be Italian. This is an overly simplified, romantic idea, similar to what Gigi was talking about. We romanticize and we simplify these identities. And this is a quote from a public health service surgeon who was in charge of inspecting these immigrants. This is an official medical expert speaking on the subject of what happens when they are going through this inspection line at rapid pace. He says, every race has its own type of reaction to inspection. And down towards the bottom of the quote, we see, if the Italian responds to questions as the Russian responds, the former would in all